Call the meeting to order. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at the minutes? You should have been sent those and had a chance to look at them. Do I have a motion to?
Motion.
No, I don't want.
Freeland's made a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, the meetings are approved. I do think we need to introduce our newest Board of Corrections member, and he's shaking his head at me and giving me the evil eye, but I'm doing it anyway. Todd Holder has been appointed by the governor and the Speaker of the House to the Board of Corrections, and we are thrilled to have someone from Alva on the Board of Corrections. Thank you, Todd, for agreeing to do that for us. We appreciate it. And thanks for coming to our meeting.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Do you need to tell us anything?
Would you like to make comments about your initial experiences, or yay or nay?
Yeah, I guess I will. You want me to come up there?
Yeah,
I really don't want to.
come up here to
I really
share
don't wanna
this.
be up there. Actually, I do. I'll tell you, I have been an official member of the Department of Corrections now, board for 30 days, 45 days, something like that. So I absolutely know nothing about the process. I did spend 8 hours at the director's office in training, and I've been to 2 official meetings of the Department of Corrections. My first initial meeting I went to and didn't have one single solitary clue of what to expect. I had talked to the warden here about what to expect and what would happen. I visited with the colleagues down there. Anyway, I couldn't get away from people who just kept talking about how do we emulate what Alva is doing? How do we get their community involved in the other correctional facilities like Alva is? How do we get the community support? How do we make our institutions like yours? And it wasn't just one person, it wasn't just the board, it was every place I've been, which is 3 places now, but every place I've been corners and says, "You're from Alva, right? How do we do this?" And I was really sorry to tell them that I didn't have a clue of how to do it, because I don't know anything different than Alva, Oklahoma. I've been born and raised, and I really don't know. Isn't every community like this one? And that's how naive I am, because apparently they're not. And isn't everybody's community behind their correctional facility like Alva is? And the answer is resounding no. And we've certainly set the bar, and it's because of my forefathers. I had nothing to do with it. I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and got asked to serve on this committee. But I will tell you this, I'm proud to be on the Board of Corrections, and I am proud to represent Alva, Northwest Oklahoma. I think it's the first time that we've had somebody truly from Northwest Oklahoma here, and I think it's wonderful. Could there have been a better pick than me? Yes, but unfortunately I'm who you got right now. So it's been very educational, very informative, and all I can say to this committee is keep up the good work, because you're way up at the top as far as the Department's Corrections is concerned, and they're very, very proud of the work that's going on. So since I don't know what goes on in these meetings, I need to be quiet and let you all talk, but I appreciate being invited, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. We appreciate your agreeing to serve and take the time to do that. So we need to discuss today too the goals, our developer goals. I can tell you what the goals that we had last year were. The first one was provide the general public with current, up-to-date information regarding activities at the facility. And the second goal is expand the volunteer program into other areas of service to include arts, hobby crafts, and music ministry. So those are our 2 goals. Does anyone that we have had previously, do I hear any discussion about those, or does someone have other ideas?
Well, we could add today's agenda as one of the goals, depending on how it's received, so.
Okay, the rehousing, okay. So we're gonna discuss a little bit later rehousing issues for inmates, so we could add that as an additional goal. Anybody else have anything? You wanna leave them the way they are? Do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
Do I have a motion about the goals? Yes,
The motions be, the motion is to approve the goals
okay.
with the addition of the rehousing.
Rehousing. Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, we have goals. Very good. Freeland, do you have a treasurer's report?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
What I really want to report is there's very little change. I would report that we did buy the vacuum cleaner. I think that was on last month's agenda. That was taken from the old Alva Chapel Fund, the original fund where we had a few dollars left. So the balance in that one now is $879.82 in the older fund. In the new Alva Prison Chapel Care Fund, which is in the Communities Foundation, even though we did not make any transactions, we have earned a little bit of interest, and we do that periodically. And for those of you who do not know, the Community Foundation is really rolling. It's really going good. Millions of dollars invested statewide, not just in our fund. We're just a part of it. But the balance now is up about $300. It's $41,959.18. So that would be my report.
Thank you. Do we need to? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Warden Melton, and she is going to discuss a new project.
A new goal.
A new goal.
We hope a new goal. All right, well, again, welcome everybody, and again, I'm too happy for the turnout today. It's a busy time of year, and especially after holiday, I appreciate your working us into your schedule, as you always do. I am very blessed, and as Todd has heard from other places, we have the most active advisory council in the state, and one who not only has a large attendance, but we have even a larger group of people who are members, and even if they only attend once a year, we still have one of the largest memberships of all the citizens advisory councils. Today, Joe Don and Wes and who else met? We had a meeting. Tisha.
Mr. Holden.
Todd was promised I would be there.
He was there in spirit.
Yeah.
And who else? Someone else was there. We had a committee meeting. Well, not a committee meeting. We had a planning meeting to talk about offender housing. And from that meeting, which was in April, I guess, at the city council, that's where we got the agenda item for today. And we have had for some time interest of local employers to hire our people. And we have a great need for workers, even before the oil field even started declining, but even now, there's still an interest in local employers of hiring our graduates. The problem being is housing. And so we got together to talk about what we might do and who might be a part of that conversation. And so we had a very preliminary planning meeting and thought that this would be the first place that we would want to start. Anything big that's happened at Bill Johnson has really come out of this advisory council, be it the chapel, or when we needed funds years back to buy a canine. All of those have been initiatives that have started here. And so we thought, well, why don't we get input from the advisory board on how do we begin to take this on in a very intentional way. And Reentry housing is a challenge across the state, I can tell you that. One, because of the offender situations. There have actually been some articles in the paper lately by Oklahoma Watch about the difficulties that offenders have, even the ones that have made wonderful progress in prison, that are really at a good place when they leave, just the challenges that they have the day they walk out the door. And a lot of that, 90% of that is probably financial, either through housing or not having a job immediately, and they've got all these costs looming over them. And so, you know, it's hard for anybody to get a job if they don't have a place to live. And so we were just going to take that one piece of reentry. Now, we have staff that work on reentry issues, but we are really at the mercy of what are those community resources across the state that are available to wherever our men are going to. So we thought we would pose the question to the advisory council about how can ALVA, or how would ALVA be willing to assist in getting reentry housing resources lined up for our offenders. And I'll have Joe Don come up, because Joe Don right now is wanting to blaze the trail. He's since Sandridge was the last employer that actually hired our people. Sandridge had an advantage because they had housing. You know, they had bunk housing, so they could place them into that, put them in the job the next day. But other than the oil field industry, there's really nobody that has housing immediately available. So Joe Don wanted to use the model that Sandridge did as far as starting that initial interviewing and getting as much of the hiring process done prior to their release. And he is well into this process. We have one offender right now that he is interested in hiring that is 2 weeks from discharge. So we have an immediate need to find a place for him to live. So kind of what the things that we talked about in the meeting, and Wes, jump in here too. There's two forms of housing. One is, could we find a pool of landlords, which would just take some phone work, that would be willing to rent to offenders and affordable housing. And then a long-term housing would be, is there a group in ALVA who might be interested in creating a transitional house? That is always more challenging, you know, because if you designate an area that for offenders, there will be people, you know, statewide that have an issue with that being in their neighborhood. So especially if it's residential, there's different models of transitional housing. Some are not in residential areas. Some are in more of a commercial area. So there's many models of that. So that, the long term, would be an immediate place where people could live temporarily until they found permanent lodging, versus on the front end, the short end would be, are there just some landlords, if there were financial resources available from the offender, just to rent, just like anybody else on the street, but just someone that would be willing to take a chance on renting to offenders. So what we were hoping is that there might be a community group that would take this on, much like the Chapel Coalition. This wouldn't be a long-term process, but basically just to do, like I said, some phone work. You know, you all know who some of the landlords are. You know who has rental property. Explain to them, you know, what we're looking at, and just find out the ones that are like, nope, don't call me, I'm not interested at all, or, you know, yeah, I would be interested. Because, you know, the people that we would be putting into these jobs would have been pre-screened. They would be the people that have worked a good program here, that we have a belief that would have a better than average chance of success, not only in their own program, but really being able to contribute to the community and become a part of the community. So the other employers besides the city of Alva,
The ones that we've identified that would probably really have an interest would be VAP and Plain Plastics. Through different meetings, they have expressed an interest in this type of program and a willingness to participate.
now one of the advantages that we have, that we didn't have at Sandridge, that we do have with the city of Alva, wouldn't be true with VAP or with Plain Plastics, is the initial test period. And so talk a little bit about how he's taken from our work crews.
Yeah, well, I mean, the current gentleman we're looking at, He actually is on one of our public works crews right now. So we've had him for maybe as much as 6 or 8 months, working him in the city, working him in different departments, working with him. The department heads know him, and they see his value. And that's one of the things that we have that other entities may not have, is that we've got the ability to work them and see if they're going to work, see if they're going to work out, see if they're going to fit in. Of course, if they don't, we certainly don't want to try to bring somebody on, but if they are working out like this gentleman is, we certainly want to try to give him every opportunity. And he's not even, where we're hiring him on at is really not even the crew that he has been working with, because that crew is full right now. So, but he has expressed an interest. Hey, if there is an opening, do I have that opportunity to move from where we're talking about going back over into the water crew? I said, I told him, there's certainly that opportunity to do that. When and if a position comes open there. It's, that part of it's been very beneficial for us, because we actually get to see their work ethic, and we get to see how they learn, and we get to train them. So really, when they hit the street and they hit the payroll, they're pretty well trained for the job. If we've had them for as long as 6 or 8 months, there may be some licensing requirements that we'd have to go through after the end of it, but depending on the job that they went into. But we've had the opportunity to work them and see that they're going to work, and do the initial training.
So we've got, as far as where this current man is in the process, he has done the job application.
Mm-hmm. And he's been interviewed by both. He's been interviewed by me and the department head that he is working for, and the department head who he would be placed in. So he's actually been through 3 job interviews so far, and every one of them felt that he would be a good fit.
And one of their processes, like a lot of employers, is drug testing. Well, we drug test as a part of the program. So our drug testing, since we just do random anyway, especially on outside crew people, he was able to use that test to meet his city requirements. Now, every employer may not be able to do that. Some employers have very specific drug testing and they have to be outside tests, but his allowed us to use one that we would be taking anyway for his pre-employment. So a lot of it's working very, very well. And I hope and I'm not really sure. I'm asking you all. I know this will be available to the public, but there's a lot of education still to be done about who these people are. I mean, people know what we do at Bill Johnson, but I'm guessing a lot of folks don't know whatever happens to those people once they complete the program. And some of them are already in this community. Some of them go back to where they came from. But we know, and a lot of the offenders who work really good programs know they don't need to be going back to where they came. And given the opportunity, they would like to start somewhere new where they have a greater chance of success. And the other part the public may not know is, in addition to offenders that we're releasing from here, there's offenders, hundreds of offenders, maybe more than hundreds, that are on probation and parole caseloads, that are in the community sentencing program, that are in the drug courts, that are working side by side with us now. But they're not as evident because they're in community-based. Now, offenders who come into the institution get a whole lot of visibility and a whole lot of stigma attached to having been in prison. But the reality is there are many people that people are working with right now that they don't know, what their history has been in the criminal justice system. And one of the advantages that I think of putting our people to work is that we have been able to see them over quite a period of time on the institutional side, and then in Joe Don's case, he will actually have seen them while they're here working in a community setting, which again helps us make really good choices about the risk factor. There will always be a risk factor on hiring any offender, but I think we certainly have the means to minimize that and should. You know, the two things that help people be successful when they walk out the door are jobs and housing. And, you know, in absence of that, they automatically can go into a higher risk category for failure if those needs aren't immediately met. So much like this community has done from the beginning of time, they have been willing to try things. This whole program was in a kind of a pilot in doing corrections differently. And I think the reentry piece, we could really, I guess, create a model of how communities even embrace offenders post-incarceration with a program like this. And again, I don't know that we're talking vast numbers. You know, many of our offenders have homes to go to, they have jobs waiting for them that will work out. So I don't think the community needs to be concerned that we're going to have thousands of offenders that discharge from Bill Johnson staying in their community, because there would be some that would have that concern. But the few that would stay, I think, would really be able to contribute and meet some needs that our employers have right now, would be very loyal and dedicated, you know, employees. So, and I didn't introduce John and one of our best volunteers, Mr. Nestor, who does Celebrate Recovery, Promise Keepers. Because they're a part of meeting some communities' needs too. And so we wanted a variety of people who are already addressing kind of populations that have needs, and we thought there might be, you know, some connections. So
I know that, not the group that I've got going right now, but the group before, I had 3 of those boys did not want to go back to their home. And
you hear it directly.
And they, I mean, I've got one that said, man, you find me a place there in Alvin, I'll come back. And so, you know, the reason they didn't is because they still have a mom that's still doing drugs, a dad that's doing alcohol, and they just don't want to go back to their environment.
And that's the place we hope we get them to, is that no matter how strong those relationships are, that this program has impacted on them. These are unhealthy environments for you to go back. No matter how sober you are, you will enhance your risk if you put yourself back in those environments. So if we had the ability to give some of those guys the opportunities to stay. So that's the question I'm posing. Would there be someone either on this council or someone that you all might know that one would kind of be the chair of this endeavor? If this is something that you all think this committee could help sponsor, and because we really have some immediate needs to try to get a resource list, try to find out some of these places that might exist that would, you know, offer housing. Now, I don't want to commit Joe Don's resources, but kind of just where we're starting initially is who are the people that have rental houses that, and again, we're not suggesting that we're going to, you know, feel a need to identify all these landlords publicly. I mean, they can rent to whoever they want. It would just be helpful for us to know, you know, would they be interested in on a case-by-case basis. Each landlord may have different criteria. I would rent to people who meet A, B, and C criteria, but not, you know, D, E, and F criteria. But it takes some legwork to do that. And even though we do have a staff member, I can tell you I'm hesitant to put one of my staff members in charge of this totally just because of his time. He does all of the reentry here for 700 and some folks, plus he does classes. So he would be an active member of this committee. He would, you know, much like, you know, Renee provides support for this, we would absolutely have someone on the committee. But I really think to appeal to the community, if it were a community member talking to other community members, I think it would be, I think it might be more successful. So anyway, that's the project. Ideas, discussion from the crowd. Yes.
Janet, I would be happy to do that. I mean, I've been, since Joe Don and I started talking about this, that's been something I've really had a lot of interest in. After that first meeting, it just kind of
Awesome,
snowballed some more, so I will do whatever
okay,
you need help with doing.
all right, thank
I
you.
have 3 questions, I think. Are there any models out there, places that have done this in the past? The second question is, when they get their walking papers, when they're, what do they have in their pocket? And I know the answer to that, I just, and I think that's the very first thing that has to be addressed, because they have absolutely nothing. And the third thing is, I think, and I think these are all things that Wes will encounter, and I've certainly been, I think we have to be mentors to those people in some way. And it doesn't mean that we just turn them loose and say, here's a place to live. I tried that before, and I'm in a situation now that we're 6 to 9 months in. A gentleman's extremely grateful, extremely kind, so on and so forth, and we're no further along than where we were 6 to 9 months ago. So there has to be goals and objectives, and there has to be, they have to have reasons to go from point A to point B, and what do they need to do to make that, because they're behind the 8 ball. They've been sitting here for a long period of time with absolutely nothing, and the obligations are just building up, or they've gone away, and they're starting out with absolutely nothing. So how do we do that? And I think that a loan program would be one of the very first things that we'd want to encounter, either a grant or a loan program, to say, here's some goals and objectives, here's what we're going to do for you, we're going to get it started, and I actually think that, I'll be quiet just a minute, and I actually think the group housing is an excellent idea, and complete with a den mother or a house father, that puts them, that is there. Say, hey, we need to go to bed, hey, we need to get up, hey, we need to eat, let's not watch that, let's watch this. And it's not something that somebody can take on, and then they transition to as an extra layer. Maybe somebody's just ready to transition into a house, but man, you go from extremely structured to not structured, and all of a sudden I have my own place, my own environment, I don't have to pay any rent. Here I am, boys. Where we go? Those are just thoughts. I'll shut up.
Tisha, there are a few national reentry models. Most of those have been on the corrections side, services that we provide. And one of the things that we've done with our reentry here is that we bring in people, we try to make the connection to the social services so they know who to go to get what. And we actually have those people come in and speak to these guys before leaving. But the piece that actually connects, to what, when they walk out the door, if there are any models, they're minimal. Now, I've been around a long time, and the original parole model, I don't know if anybody remembers that, was that to get, for an offender to parole back in the 70s and 80s, they had to have a home offer, and they had to have a job. Now we no longer require parolees to have jobs, because obviously some employers are just not going to commit anymore like they did back in the day, because there were very few parolees in the early days of parole, so it wasn't, now we have more. But the third piece of that was they all had to have a parole advisor, and that was someone from the community who would serve that mentor role. And so when you were verifying this is where they're living, this is where they're going to be working, you would also verify, are you willing to mentor this person? Now, there was no legal requirement to it. It was just a contact person in the community, not family, that would do that very thing that you were saying. Now, that's long since gone by the wayside. Was really a good idea back in the day, because often that was in addition to their parole officer, but it was somebody who really couldn't get them in trouble. Now, not to say if they were running amok that they wouldn't call the probation and parole officer, but that wasn't their primary role. It was primarily an advocacy role. Someone they could call if they had a question, or just somebody that would check in on them. People underestimate how important that is, and I think a lot of people are intimidated by that process, but sometimes that's really all it takes. Somebody just picking up the phone once a week and calling and saying, hey, Bill, how you doing? That one thing, really keeps people following the rules, and when they're having that stress, just one person they could maybe talk to before things go south. So the more of those little people that you have surrounding offenders, the greater success there is. I don't know, Tisha could probably explain this model. I don't mean to digress, but one of the things we do in treatment group is one of Trent Spade's activities when they get close to going.
Not the group that I've got going right now, but the group before, I had 3 of those little kids not want to go back to their home.
You
And
hear it directly.
they, I mean, I've got one that said, man, you find me a place there in Alvin, I'll come back. And so, you know, the reason they didn't is because they still have a mom that's still doing drugs, a dad that's doing alcohol, and they just don't want to go back to that environment.
And that's the place we hope we get them to, is that no matter how strong those relationships are, that this program has impacted on them. These are unhealthy environments for you to go back. No matter how sober you are, you will enhance your risk if you put yourself back in those environments. So if we have the ability to give some of those guys the opportunities to stay. So that's the question I'm posing. All right.
I have 3 questions, I think. Are there any models out there in places that have done this in the past? The second question is, when they get their walking papers, and what do they have in their pocket? And I know the answer to that, I think that's the very first thing that has to be addressed, because they have absolutely nothing. And the third thing is, I think, and I think these are all things that Wes will encounter and I'd certainly do. I think we have to be mentors to those people in some way, and it doesn't mean that we just turn them loose and say, here's a place to live. I tried that before, and I'm in a situation now that we're 6 to 9 months in. A gentleman's extremely grateful, extremely kind, so on and so forth. But we're no further along than where we were 6 to 9 months ago. So there has to be goals and objectives, and there has to be, they have to have reasons to go from point A to point B, and what do they need to do to make that, because they're behind the 8 ball. They've been sitting here for a long period of time with absolutely nothing, and the obligations are just building up, or they've gone away and they're starting out with absolutely nothing. So how do we do that? And I think that a loan program would be one of the very first things that we want to encounter, either a grant or a loan program, to say, here's some goals and objectives, here's what we're going to do for you, we're going to get it started. And I actually think that, I'll be quiet just a minute, and I actually think the group housing is an excellent idea, and complete with a den mother or a house father, that puts them, that is there. Say, hey, we need to go to bed. Hey, we need to get up. Hey, we need to eat. Let's not watch that. Let's watch this. And it's not something that somebody can take on. And then they transition to as an extra layer. Maybe somebody's just ready to transition into a house, but man, you go from extremely structured to not structured, and all of a sudden I have my own place, my own environment, I don't have to pay any rent. Here I am, boys. Where we go. Those are just thoughts. I'll shut up.
Tisha, there are a few national reentry models. Most of those have been on the corrections side, services that we provide. And one of the things that we've done with our reentry here is that we bring in people. We try to make the connection to the social services so they know who to go to get what, and we actually have those people come in and speak to these guys before leaving. But the piece that actually connects, to what, when they walk out the door, if there are any models, they're minimal. Now, I've been around a long time, and the original parole model, I don't know if anybody remembers that, was that to get for an offender to parole, back in the 70s and 80s, they had to have a home offer, and they had to have a job. Now we no longer require parolees to have jobs, because obviously some employers are just not going to commit anymore like they did back in the day, because there were very few parolees in the early days of parole. So it wasn't. Now we have more. But the third piece of that was they all had to have a parole advisor. And that was someone from the community who would serve that mentor role. And so when you were verifying this is where they're living, this is where they're going to be working, you would also verify, are you willing to mentor this person? Now, there was no legal requirement to it. It was just a contact person in the community, not family, that would do that very thing that you were saying. Now, that's long since gone by the wayside. Was really a good idea back in the day, because often that was in addition to their parole officer, but it was somebody who really couldn't get them in trouble. Now, not to say if they were running amok that they wouldn't call the probation or parole officer, but that wasn't their primary role. It was primarily an advocacy role. Someone they could call if they had a question, or just somebody that would check in on them. You know, people underestimate how important that is, and I think a lot of people are intimidated by that process, but sometimes that's really all it takes. Somebody just picking up the phone once a week and calling and saying, hey, Bill, how you doing? That one thing, you know, really keeps people following the rules, and when they're having that stress, just one person they could maybe talk to before things go south. So the more of those little people that you have surrounding offenders, you know, the greater success there is. I don't know, Tisha could probably explain this model. I don't mean to digress, but one of the things we do in treatment group is one of Trent Spade's activities. When they get close to going out, they put the offender in the middle of the room and they give them strings. And so then they start identifying their support systems. And so this person's saying, you're like my parents. So he holds one string out there. And then, you know, so he goes around and identifies all the different support systems that will help you, you know, follow the rules and be successful. And they stand up and then they turn. And so you're wrapped really tight in support. So, you know, it's a visual for the guys. And then he goes to the reverse. What happens when you lie to your parents? You know, you lie to people you care about and they drop the string. And so they can see what happens and how things unravel. Now, we get all that, but that's exactly the kind of model that reentry could be, is that the more support connections that these guys have, jobs, you know, through a landlord that might be a little bit more than a landlord, you know, a community person who is willing to just check on them once a week. You're not taking them to rage, you're not taking them to support, you're not paying their bills, but just another person. So I think, you know, there's a lot of things we could do with this model. I mean, we just started out looking for, can we build a resource of housing? But this model could really become much more if there's that kind of interest in the community. I think the church
I was gonna say,
community would be so interested in doing this.
I know our church has discussed for some time now the possibility of the need of a halfway house, and you know, Al and I both would be very willing to sit in on any committee or help in that portion. But I really like the way that this is being discussed because it is multi-layered. It's not, and I think Todd's brought up a great point because the financial side, I mean, being able to come down with deposits, electric and all of that right off the bat is, you know, but I think we have some things that are going on here, like, I mean, the city right now has an awful lot of our inmates that are out there working, and what a great opportunity for our city to put back into those guys that have already shown interest and effort to do work by giving them, whether, you know, maybe a grant or something like that. If they've shown that progress, you know, they've stayed in that program and done that for the length of time that they've been here through the program. I see that as multifaceted and a great way to look at it.
Who was it that brought up, there might be, again, some calls to be made would be checking with some of the private sector businesses. Maybe they would be willing to set up or contribute.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was the other thing, is how do you, yes?
John, I'm going out to the food bank to get the food for
I was gonna say, what time is
lunch
done?
program, so.
Yeah, another great program
Yep,
launching today.
yes.
And I was just telling
O'clock.
Wes that over the years, Shaky Properties has many times knowingly and unknowingly rented to parolees, convicted felons, and escapees, I think, on one occasion.
Was that you?
Oh, now. We'll add you to our search list.
Not a crook. But,
Okay,
include me.
thank you, thank you. Would be to, if there was a way to set up a foundation, now we can't do that, but if there would be some way to set up a foundation where private sector could donate for that very reason, here's some, you know, if there's a committee that identifies the need for a certain group of offenders that meet certain criteria, then they could be given a grant, startup housing grant, or whatever. I mean, whatever parameters are, you know, there probably would be some people who would contribute, but I think there'd have to be a way to set it up as a, you know, a nonprofit of some sort. So
And there may already be a nonprofit sitting out there under the Communities Foundation, for example, that could add that to their layer of, you know, being able to have an account for giving. We just probably need to identify one that could.
how is the Bankit thing? Is that
That's a separate account
But
through
it's
the
not-
Communities Foundation.
it is through the Communities
I'm
Foundation?
almost positive, but I will research that. Does somebody here know that?
Yes,
Is it under Communities? Okay.
it had been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was established that way.
Community Foundation has, I think, 48 causes in Alva. So they're very willing to work with our community in capacity.
So that is a 501c3.
Yes.
Community Foundation is a 501c3, which allows contributors to make that tax deductible gift without having to have a charity located in Alva.
So that is just an application process through them?
Yeah, you would apply to have a fund started, and then they either will or they won't based on the cause.
So you don't have to set up your own?
No,
No,
I
no,
see, you're
and
just-
that's the,
If it
That's
meets
the
their
beauty.
criteria,
Yes.
well,
That's the
then that
beauty
might
of
be,
it. That's the beauty of it right there. You don't have to do the 501c3.
they determine.
They
if
will
if
bend
it's a
over backward.
eligible
yes.
cause.
Community Foundation will bend over backwards to help you set up an account if you need one.
There's some drawbacks to if you get
There
so
are
big, you
fees.
may want to be independent of the community foundation, but for something like this, I mean, for starting out, that'd certainly be a good avenue to go.
I mean, there are fees involved, but.
Well, that would be two big pieces. One would be to create some way to give some people, either through a grant or a loan or something, some immediate access to funds to be able to get into a private, and they would actually feel more of a part of the community if they're living on their own and paying their own bills. And then long-term,
And is that,
transition, there's been a need for a transition living in Alva, in northwest Oklahoma, quite frankly. The only ones that there are in Enid, Ponca City. Is there anyone in Woodward?
yeah,
Because they're different than treatment facilities. These are
I
truly,
think they had some of the in-house, or what you and I talked about, where they have an individual house that's purchased.
the Oxford House
Oxford House.
model
Oxford House.
is, yeah. And I think they were working on getting one in Enid. They typically go to bigger cities, but the model is out there.
Got two boys in Tulsa right now.
Yeah. The Oklahoma City Tulsa ones are very full, very successful, so.
You'd have the option with Community Foundation to either set it up as I think a grant to an individual might be a little bit picky or tricky, but if you set it up as a scholarship, that may be, then they can do either, whichever one they do.
I think I have a concern about finding the rentals for these people to
Well-
live in, because rental property in Alva is not easy to find. And I have a child that's looking for rental property.
Well, I can tell you, it's an issue
And
for
she-
our officers. We've got officers who we're hiring, they can't afford to get into a place here. And thankfully, we've got some staff that have got some we've just piecemealed it on a case-by-case basis. And we've had some driving from Enid, Chief, and because they could find, and that's a bear when you're working 12-hour shifts and then you're driving another hour and a half on both ends of
Well, and
that.
they aren't gonna have transportation to do that.
So housing is a challenge, so, long range, if there were enough entities interested in doing a transition house, they could live there a month or two and wait out some openings, versus just having, to have someplace in line, because this time of year, I'm hoping the one we have that's discharging in 2 weeks, we've got, the clock is ticking, that's trying to find a place for him to live in 2 weeks, so he can go to work. I mean, Joe said everything's set up for him to start in 2 weeks, but we don't have housing for him yet. So, that would give us not quite the pressure if there were a transition living house. But if you all have any ideas, or anybody we can call real quick for this one individual, that would be a wonderful thing. So we
we
could,
have the resource list that we can sure give of people who've
just
paid to be on our list, but it's information we give out every day, so
and just to call them and just say, again, I want to be upfront. I mean, we don't have to, and these people have no obligation to disclose all that, but I think we want the community to be a part of this, and in some ways some advantages for them coming and saying, look, this is who I am, and I hope you'll give me the chance to rent from you. I think that will be a far better successful model than just trying to get them hooked up and, oh, by the way, they find out later. So, you know, I do think there should be enough employers that, or not employers, landlords. But anyway. So where do we go from here, Joe? Or I guess.
Be up to you. I mean, I think we identify, you know, for the committee to start working, we gotta identify people that'll be on it. Be willing to work on it. I mean, we've got one, and maybe two, Todd willing to work on it.
So we've got Wes, we've got Todd.
I have to show up,
Is there anybody else on this committee? And again, like on the Chapel Coalition, the core group of the Chapel Coalition was from the advisory, but we specifically invited people that had the interest that were not a member of our advisory board, who still aren't. I mean, they will always be associated with the Chapel Coalition Committee, so they don't always have to be members of this committee, but I think it's good to have a core on this, and we could make you a permanent member of the advisory board as well. John, I mean, I don't know.
You know, are we looking at two different
Okay,
committees or
well,
two or one?
I would just start with one.
I would
right
say
now,
one.
And then we'll see if it needs to split off, maybe.
I don't see why right now, I wouldn't see why the committee could not start with, you know, okay, we're trying to find a place to move into, we're trying to find a transitional house type of thing. I mean, the long-range goal, I think, for the community would be transitional houses, realizing that there is a short-term need out there.
When we first started talking about this, Joe Don and I were looking at personnel issues, and at the city at the time, all the oil field stuff that was going on, excuse me, was really hindering who we had available to hire in the entry-level positions. And, you know, when we started talking about hiring prisoners, the one issue we had was the housing. So I think it's important that we start now with that. We know that the integration process down the road of, you know, everything else that's going to come along with that, and the mentorship and all of that is going to have to fall in place eventually. But without the housing, we've got nothing. I mean, if we don't have a place for them to go day one out of here, all the other stuff doesn't matter. So if we can figure out how to get the housing part down, we'll be, I think that's a good start, because that was the one issue we had. We started talking about the city doesn't want to go buy a house to house somebody, but we were willing to make that part of their salary maybe, and say, we can give you 6 months worth of rent, that's part of your initial hiring contract, but you're only going to make this much an hour, we're going to take care of the housing, the bills. And in discussions during that first meeting, well, part of it was that to reintegrate, these guys have to be on their own. They got to pay their own bills and figure out how to do that themselves.
Is there some that come out though that have to be in some type of a halfway house in order to be able to be released?
There's a few, not
All of
typically
them have
all.
to do 6-month probation. It's mandatory up to 6-month probation. And then anything after that's kind of depending on if they have regular probation.
But a probation would be just reporting to a probation
Just
officer.
reporting.
What I think John's talking about is a place they have to report to. You know, I'm here, you're here you check out at 8 o'clock in the morning to go to your job. At 5 o'clock, you check back in and you don't leave. That's kind of what I see as a transitional house.
But they don't have to do that.
It depends on the.
Our people typically don't. Now, there are people who leave here who have time left to serve that may go to a community security level, you know, to still finish out their sentence. That's a whole nother discussion about whether we could build that into our program. And I've tested the water with the new director on designating us as a work release facility. So we would have not only minimum security programs, and my chief's just too thrilled about this. Well, you know, but we've never tied the work release option where they could go out and literally get into paid jobs while they're still serving their time, and out of that they pay program support, they pay back their cost of incarceration, they pay back their court costs, so they start getting a jump start on getting a handle on some of their financial obligations anyway.
And their housing would be here.
But they come here, you know, we either take them to work or the employer picks them up. They're at work all day. It's the only place they can be, and they come back here at night. So it's yet another step down. But that's always been connected to community security level facilities, never minimum. So that would be a change in department policy to allow minimum security to take on that function. But I think we obviously have got some interest in our community that might make that too, something worth trying. So I don't know where that's going, but that's a whole other thing that the agency would have to change procedure to allow us to do. But most of them don't come out with, because of what we do here. If they hadn't just completed a treatment program, some do have parole stipulations for treatment, but typically we've met that requirement for them. So really all they've got is just traditional probation or parole supervision and then walk out the door.
And that's what I've learned about the gentleman we were looking at hiring. We're looking at hiring, and that is through the, I think he's released here on the 4th. But at that time, he's got one more test he needs to do for us before he can be truly employed. But then he leaves the 4th. I think he has to go back to Oklahoma City, which is maybe his hometown or whatever, to check in and get some things squared away with that for his release. And he's not going to be able, we're not going to be able to start until around the 15th. There's a time frame in there.
He has to get his probation transferred to Alabama,
And he has to do it
Oklahoma
from
City.
So there, depending on that situation, there's maybe a few extra, a week or so extra there that, you're not under the gun on.
We really need a housing, even if it's not a long term, even if it's just something, place for him to land until he can get on his feet, so anyway.
Awesome. And I can do what I need to do as well, so.
We will visit.
And one of the side benefits that I see from this as the city manager is that when we get into a hiring crunch, so to speak, we've got a more trained crew to pull from, because one, these guys actually see there's maybe some light at the end of the tunnel that I can go work for this place when I'm released, so I'm gonna do a better job while I'm here. And I think that's definitely a benefit for the city.
I think the goals and objectives were to keep these guys out as taxpayers instead of tax receivers. And I think that's not just for the tax side of it, but for their own good. I think that's for the benefit. And I can't think of a better place to have that happen than Alva, Oklahoma. They're going to have as good opportunity here as they would any place else. And because of the community spirit and the smallness, there's more family watching them here than there is in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
That's what's, and if those few cases that they might not work out, we would have many, many eyes upon them, and they would be easily detected, and we would deal with that in an appropriate way. Whereas in a big city, they would be more invisible. So, this I think it's a very safe place for a very safe community from the community standpoint, as well as from the offender standpoint.
100 years ago, AC and Betty Zimmerman were very, very active in a foreign student population that was in town here. And I don't know what model they used, and maybe it was from Northwestern, but it's the same thing. Those kids are coming over here in a total different environment. They're placed in a new environment. Well, these people have been incarcerated for 5, 10, 30, 15 years. It's all changed. And that was a family oriented, where a family took a student and said, hey, come into our home. Let's help you make sure that you're not lost.
Real quick, because I know we're over, one of the things the Chapel Coalition Committee did was generate names of people who might be interested in contributing. So are there some names that you all, and not that you're committing them, but just a call list that we could start from, besides landlords or just other people who might have a vested interest? I know we talked about Dr. Decker maybe being a member of the committee. We haven't asked her yet, but I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do that since this is all
One of the things I would
on broadcast. But if you would get with either Wes or Joe Don of who might be some people that we could at least ask, and they, in that list there'll be people who have other priorities and may not want to, but people who may have a
And that may be
resources or
something,
connection.
through the Ministerial Alliance. I know, as, at the chambers, we get people who are in need. We refer them to the Ministerial Alliance, so it may be that we connect with the Ministerial Alliance and see if, our churches have church members that might be interested in
Ron,
helping as well.
That's a good idea.
Ron Pingleton was at that initial meeting.
That's it. I knew there was, Ron. So is he might be willing to continue?
I think him or anybody from the Ministerial Alliance.
Ministerial Alliance.
And I think we
We've
just
got
need
John
to
here, so.
get past Bob Brown.
Barbara, do they have a meeting coming up?
No,
Just
not
have
till
one.
They break for the summer?
we break
Yeah.
for the summer. The next one will be
We
in,
just met last
I can
week.
talk to Ron. I'll talk to him.
Okay.
I'm,
Well, we can talk to our minister too.
Yeah,
and
Bob
just see.
Pastor Bob sends out a message to everyone through some type of,
oh, we all can do that.
okay, so there's a connection, he could send that out.
Okay.
Would you like to set a date, possibly a time and location for a meeting?
For the subcommittee?
Who's going first?
Yeah.
We'll
I'll
have
be
a city
there
hall.
Seriously,
probably
this
need
week
to do
probably
it at
needs
the
to be
end of
done.
the week or
Yeah.
Monday for sure.
The days
If
are
he
not-
gets done, if he gets released on the 4th. Gonna say,
I'm sorry, is that illegal?
Oh, does he really?
You have your
Look at
phone
this.
in here?
We gave you a phone too?
He's off the committee,
Sorry,
that's
I didn't ask
it.
Oh, you're good. Mr.
He's on the
You can
prison
have
board,
your
he's
phone.
got free time.
I'm already kicked off.
Kicked off, you can't get out.
That might be the greatest thing.
Yeah, higher calling than this council's.
That's funny. Not really.
Monday,
June 1st is Monday.
And what we can do is if you all, we can be and we can send out notices, we can do, the notifying for the subcommittee, because we will have somebody there too, either be,
It'll probably be because
Pridmore or
Mr.
Tisha.
Pridmore is out.
Well, just for 2 weeks.
I might be out next week too, so.
I wouldn't mind
But I
doing it.
can warn him and arrange.
Right, but yeah, Tisha is over all programs and Kim works for her, so we'll have a we'll have a representative,
We can meet at City Hall, so.
okay?
So do we need to do it Friday or Monday?
I better get on it.
Friday, I
think
think
it's
would be
Friday.
better. I mean, it doesn't matter to me,
No, I
but
think you're good.
So Friday the 31st?
31st is Sunday.
Oh, what's this?
Oh,
This is
20.
29th.
29th.
What time?
Did it, when was the last one?
We had the
You want
last
during the
meeting,
week or after hours?
we had it we had it lunch. We had it
Oh, what
during
lunch? Like, did you do lunch?
Yeah.
Is
You
it,
can always have
is an hour.
a lunch meeting.
Mm.
I mean, you get to set
I don't want to
a
commit.
lot of agenda there to figure out what you're gonna do and where you're gonna go with it.
Well, somebody should break up the call list and just, finding, getting.
our immediate concern is to find this
Well-
particular young man a place to live. Is what we really need to have done.
Well, that would be great. I hate to make it just about one person, but I mean, that is part of the model, is seeing how do we get this set up for one and then come
Gotta
back.
start someplace.
Yeah, you do, Noon at
Noon,
City-
Friday?
Noon Friday at City Hall.
I probably can't be.
And
there.
Mr. Holden, there's no cell phone
12:30?
restrictions at City Hall.
But
What?
I told Mr. Holden there's no cell phone restrictions at City Hall.
Well, he's exempted actually, in his new capacity.
so noon on Friday. Okay.
One of the few, actually, one only person in Alba that could bring a cell phone into our facility.
So far.
Okay.
He should feel honored, because I just got mine back a year ago. I couldn't even bring it in. It took it away from everybody, yeah. So, okay, off with it. Are we off?
That one's off.
Todd's recording it on his cell phone.
Yeah.
If I knew that, I
Oh, is
would
it
not know.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is our first advisory council meeting since Becky Guffey has become our deputy warden. I know she's been to some of our chamber coffees and you've met her there, but officially to this group, we are too happy and
that she is on board and she has hit the ground literally running, and we are very happy to have her back. She is from this area, but left for a while and became one of those Oklahoma City folks, and but now we've got her back in Northwest Oklahoma, and we're glad we have her at Bill Johnson. So, welcome. Feel free to contact her if you have questions. She's a wonderful resource. Okay, well, what else? We got a meeting, we got a new project, and I really do appreciate y'all. I do think this could really be something that people could look at and decide to emulate. The need is great, so. All right, I guess, do you want me to adjourn for the, are you co-chair?
Yeah.
You can officially adjourn.
Okay.